She's become one of the foremost thinkers on the intersection of technology and humanity and has even been called Intel's secret weapon. This secret weapon isn't a program or an engineer, but an anthropologist who helps Intel understand how people actually use the devices and gadgets its chips power. Genevieve Bell is Intel's Director of Interaction and Experience Research and also the co-author of Divining a Digital Future. She's live at the Web 2.0 Technology Conference in San Francisco with our own Cory Johnson. Cory?
Yeah, Emily, thanks. Well, Genevieve Bell, Emily just read a wonderful introduction of you and maybe plugged your book as well. Cultural anthropologist at Intel?
It's always the opening gambit, but people say to me, how on earth did you end up in that job? And truthfully, while it's not a story I'd rehearse often on television, I met a man in a bar in Palo Alto in 1998, and he led me astray into industry. And I've been at Intel now for 13 years. My job has always been to bring stories about people and their daily lives inside the company and use them to drive new product direction, to talk about our sort of strategic impulses, and to think about how you build new technology with a really strong eye to what value it needs to deliver to actual human beings.
I've been thinking a lot about Steve Jobs lately with his passing and his illness, and it struck me that Jobs is a guy who always thought of what the device did, not what it was, and that was very much contrary to Intel, which is about making a faster processor.
Well, Steve's great kind of, I think, wonderful vision was always this notion that you had to start with an experience, and then you back-ended your way into the technology that would deliver that.
And is that your job at Intel?
Yeah, and I think it's not always visible to people outside of the company how many places that has an impact. I mean, if you look at when Intel moved, I know it's prehistory now, but when Intel went from Pentium to Centrino, in order to make us sort of the Centrino technology, you actually had to have an imagination of what it was going to do. It was going to be mobile, it wasn't going to be on a desk, it was going to be out in the wild.
And so the notion, at that point, you really do have to understand the products that don't exist yet.
Absolutely.
To begin a 3 or 4 or 5 year cycle of developing a new chip.
Yeah, and you have to ask all the questions about things that are really practical, like power and weight and size, and it drove really different technology development to have an understanding of what the experience would be years from the time we were actually starting the product.
So one of the things I love about this conference every year is a discussion of these big ideas.
Absolutely.
You're going to sit down on the stage shortly and talk about data, big data?
I am. It was always really daunting. I get invited to the Web 2.0 things on a quasi-regular basis, and it's always really daunting to me to come and they say, no, we just want you to do the anthropological thing, right? And I often think, what does that mean exactly? And so when I realized...
They're thinking the same thing.
Yeah, so I realized the theme this year was, the data frame. So these notions of big data, data analytics, the cloud. And I was really sort of trying to imagine what could I say in this conversation that would be useful. And it struck me as I was looking back over the work my team's done in the last couple of years that we have this really kind of radically different point of view on data. And for me, it was about starting to ask the question a little bit cheeky, a Kevin Kelly question, where Kevin would ask, what does data want? I actually think the question is, who is data? And I really sort of started to think about if you could think about data as though it were a person, what were the kind of things you might say about it? And there's some things that are immediately really clear.
Wait, that's weird. But so, because the conversation about data is often, there's tons of data that companies can now start to access and tailor their offerings to the individual consumer. Facebook is all about that.
Oh, absolutely. But
instead, you're just talking to the computer.
I'm actually suggesting you can turn that whole paradigm on its head. Because I think, one of the things we often do when we talk about things like data analytics and big data is we kind of imagine a world in which all the data is of equal weight and equal portions, you can just sort of rearrange it, right? And I think, it's really clear that some data is very different than others, whether it's the fact that as consumers we routinely reposition ourselves in ways to make ourselves look better. We check into places we haven't been.
Right.
We tell Facebook we're watching things we aren't watching.
I see.
We basically lie.
The data lie, right.
We lie using data, which means that what we imagine this data is that we're working with isn't always a full and truthful set. Data wants to look better than it is. Data is also all about keeping secrets, right? We keep back things that we don't want to have on the internet. We want to hold things for ourselves.
It's this constant discussion. Sean Parker was just talking about this on stage, and the usefulness of Facebook's privacy and the overreaching of Facebook privacy. Actually, he didn't want to talk about that part, citing his shareholders. So you take these ideas and it ends up in silicon?
Oh, absolutely. So at the moment, I have a futurist on my staff. I think you've had him on your show a couple of times, Brian David Johnson.
Right.
And he's been really working with thinking about what will the world look like in 2020.
Right.
And he has this kind of threads that he thinks are going to run through the next 10 years of computing. And one of them for him is this notion he's calling the secret life of data. So what data is doing when we're not looking, basically. And for me, I'm really interested in starting to sketch out what that might look like. And because Intel has long design cycles,
Right.
you know, we can have conversations now that will find roots in silicon in 2020.
That's crazy. I'm anxious to see her talk and live long enough to see the silicon that's
sure
keeping
you will.
secrets from me. Hal is waiting. Genevieve Bell, really interesting stuff. We're going to catch you on stage when you're in there later.
It's my pleasure,
And we're going to
Cory.
get more from Web.